Dr. Aditi, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me, Doug. It's such a pleasure to join you today.
It's an honor to have you here, and I'd love to jump right in. Why are so many people great at managing stress? And then why are other people not so good at managing their stress? What's going on there?
You know, that's a really complicated way to start the conversation. I love that. First off, the answer is not this like, oh, it's because of this. There's actually several layers to it. So the first is just your genetic makeup. Some of us, through life experiences, through childhood experiences, there's so many factors that govern how you are going to respond to stress. And so a lot of it is just, how you're built and how you're made. The other part is how you're nurtured and what happens in your life, because we know that early childhood trauma or adverse effects in childhood do, in fact, change your brain and change your stress response. But what is most important now, no matter what has happened to you in the past, whether it be your childhood or past, even the past like 5, 10, 15 years, what matters is that there's this concept of neuroplasticity. And that means that your brain can change. It's a muscle, just like your bicep. So some people train their biceps and so they can lift heavy things and they're feeling good and strong. Others, their biceps are deconditioned and they can't really lift heavy things. So it's like, yes, there is a starting point of how we all have certain things. It's easier to understand when it comes to like your muscles, right? Like some people just have good biceps. They're born with it. Just a little bit of extra tweaking and they can get it to work optimally. Others have weak upper arms and biceps and they have to do a lot of training to get to a certain level. But the real like important thing to know is that regardless of where you start, you can empower yourself to know that you have the ability and skills, or you can learn the ability and skills to, just like we would with our biceps and training with muscles, you have the ability and skills to train your brain to handle and respond to stress more effectively because of this concept of neuroplasticity. It's like a big scientific word, but it simply means that your brain is a muscle. It responds to change, it responds to external stimuli and things that you do to it. And so that is really the principle and basis of all of my work. But really, when you're thinking about habit formation and trying to do something new and different in your life that might be positive, or conversely, when you take up a habit that's not really great, it's like, why do you keep doing it when you don't feel good about it? It's because of neuroplasticity. And so that's sort of the foundation of why some people manage their stress well, some people don't manage their stress well inherently, and then what you can do about it for the future.
Right. And then so what I guess what you're getting at is in order to manage stress effectively in the future and kind of change your quote unquote DNA, you have to become resilient. Talk about the importance of becoming resilient and how can somebody do that so they can handle stress better?
So I would say that you can't change your DNA, right? Like when you're talking about how you said like quote unquote change your DNA, I would say that you can't change your DNA because your genetics are your genetics, but you can certainly alter genetic expression. We know epigenetics and all of those things. So we don't have to get, you know, that complicated. But when you're talking about resilience, and the other thing I will say about stress is that right now, if you feel like if you're listening to this or watching this and you're thinking, oh, I'm definitely not handling stress well, chances are most of us are not. You and I are certainly not in this era and this moment. And you're not alone. And it's not your fault. 70% of people have at least one feature of stress and burnout right now. And most people are struggling. So, in a room of 30 people, 21 people have some form of stress and burnout. That's not a personal failing. That's not a genetic flaw. That's not something that happened to you when you were younger. It's because whatever has happened to you that has brought you to this point, over the past several years, we've had one onslaught after the other of calamities, humanitarian crises, our own personal, individual, and collective trauma from living through a very difficult experience in 2020 and 2021, right? So we are all kind of running on fumes right now. So that also has a factor in managing your stress and ultimately how resilient you feel. That can be in quotes like that sense of resiliency. Because if you're coming at it with a full tank and lots of reserves, yes, of course you're going to feel more resilient. But most of us are running on fumes. And so what is resilience? So, when you and I are talking about this word, Your listeners might cringe because I also, when I hear the word resilient or when people say, oh, just try to be resilient, it's like so cringeworthy. And you have a visceral response. You're like, ugh, resilient. Don't try to tell me to be resilient. And that's a lot because back in, I don't know, 2017 and 18, maybe even 2019, resilience was a positive word. The scientific term of what is resilience is true resilience. It's your innate ability, your innate biological ability. We all have it to recover, adapt, and grow in the face of life's challenges. And you need a little bit of stress for resilience to show itself. What's happened now is that the definition of resilience has changed. It is no longer true resilience in scientific terms. What it is toxic resilience. It's a manifestation of hustle culture. You've heard these messaging, you've heard these messages of toxic resilience for many years. It's like, oh, you can take on another deadline. You're resilient. You can parent like you don't have a job and work like you don't have kids because you're resilient. Or you can take on more responsibilities at home or at work or in life in general because you're resilient. And if you can't do any of those things, it's probably because you're not that resilient. And so I debunk all of those messages because it's not true resilience, it's toxic resilience. True resilience honors your human limitations, your boundaries, your ability to say no, and really celebrates you from a lens of self compassion and grace. Toxic resilience is the opposite. Toxic resilience, these messages that we get all the time about be more resilient, in quotes. Toxic resilience is about productivity at all costs, a mind over matter mindset. And it's about not really understanding your human biological needs for rest and recovery. And, there are many examples of toxic resilience in every country. The US, we have the Energizer Bunny, like just keep going, no matter what, just keep going. In the UK, there's keep calm and carry on. But regardless of the country, the messaging and, this toxic resilience is something that we have, it's very much a socialized thing. And since childhood, we've been taught at a very young age you must tolerate lots of discomfort, high levels of discomfort, if you want to be resilient. And I would push back against that and say, no, that's not the true scientific definition of resilience at all. Resilience is about, yes, meeting the moment and rising up to certain challenges, but it's within healthy means. And I mentioned that you need a little bit of stress to show that, resilience needs a little bit of stress to show itself. And resilience doesn't function in a vacuum. But the main notion right now is that there is no healthy stress right now, right? Like there's two kinds of stress. There's good, healthy stress, and there's bad stress. And we're probably going to talk about that. But most of us are living at such high levels of stress that it's like it supersedes this idea of just being more resilient because we are, like we said before, we're running on fumes and it's very difficult to step up and meet the moment when you don't have a lot of gas in the tank, as many of us feel right now.
So what would be a good first step for somebody to take if they feel like they don't have a lot of gas in the tank right now? They're overwhelmed, they're super stressed, and they're looking to kind of reinvent the way that they manage stress so that they can become more resilient when they're facing hard times.
That's a great question. And that's like most people right now. And I would say the first most important step is to give yourself lots of grace and use the lens of self compassion. Because studies show that when you feel a sense of self compassion and really, take care of yourself and are more gentle with yourself, understanding that this moment in time has been it's been very difficult getting here. And it just doesn't feel like it's letting up, right? Like there's just one thing after the other, and everyone's just trying to keep all of the balls in the air. The key is to give yourself lots of self compassion and grace because the studies show that when you do that, it's not just like a nice to have, it's actually part of the brain. You decrease the power and the activity in an area of the brain that governs stress called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a small almond shaped structure deep in the brain. And its sole purpose is it's the main thing that it's meant to do for you is survival and self preservation. And so the amygdala, when you're feeling a sense of stress, that's where stress comes from, the fight or flight response, and the stress and your amygdala is like really fired up. So if you're feeling a sense of stress, you have, your amygdala is overactive. As many of us, we are living with a chronically elevated activity in our amygdala simply because we live in the modern world right now. And it's about dialing down that amygdala response. And there's many ways to do this, which is what we're probably going to be talking about today One of which, and the starting point, is to give yourself some self-compassion, because that has been shown to decrease activity in your amygdala. And then that's a good starting point, and then everything that goes from there, you know?
I'm so glad you brought up self-compassion, because one of the things that I've struggled with, and a lot of other people I think struggle with, is the idea that, when you go through when you get stressed about a situation, that you're the only person who's going through that, or when you get anxious about a situation, you're the only person that goes through that, and you think it's like a character defect, right? And so you start to spiral, and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm feeling this way. Maybe I'm not as confident as I thought I was. Maybe I'm not as gracious as I thought I was, or maybe I'm not as grateful as I thought I was about my life, or whatever the example is. And they spiral and spiral and spiral. So I'm so glad that you brought that up, because it's a lot of people struggle with that. And so let's just say somebody has gotten to that place where they understand that it's a normal part of the human experience. How can we start to calm down the amygdala during super stressful situations, so that people can, move through it in a healthy way?
What you're describing, that feeling of shame and isolation, is the stress paradox. So, stress is something that is happening to all of us all the time, particularly now at this moment in time. Like I shared those statistics, right? The data doesn't lie. And yet, we all feel isolated in this experience of we're collectively isolated in this experience. And I noticed this when I was seeing patients in my Boston waiting room. People would sit shoulder to shoulder, and no one would talk about their stress, and then they would come into my exam room, the door would close, and they would burst into tears. And forward facing, high powered people who keep it together at all costs, again, they're living that myth of toxic resilience, as you and I and so many people have. I used to be that way, and I've slowly, based on the science, changed and really leaned into my vulnerability. And so, this idea of the stress paradox, we're all going through something. We're all struggling, of course, in our own individual way. And so, understanding that you are not alone and it is not your fault can be very powerful and validating. In fact, in clinical medicine, when you're doing group therapy, it's one of the first tenets. Like when you're going through something difficult and then you share with others, when the other person says, wow, that happened to me too. Oh my goodness. It can be so therapeutic. It's called the group effect. It's actually like a thing that happens amongst groups. So being open and leading with authenticity and vulnerability is a great first step amongst your trusted people, of course. But there are so many things that you can do to rewire your brain. We talked about neuroplasticity and why we can rewire your brain. That's why. And so you can rewire your brain for less stress and more resilience. And it doesn't mean that you're taking a 6 month, break and hiatus from your life and moving to Bali and doing surf camp, though. I mean, sign me up for that plan. That would be fantastic. It means that you can do many of these things right in the middle of your messy, overscheduled life. And so there are several ways that you can do that. The first, of course, we use the lens of self-compassion, and we can talk about, there's in the book, in my book, The 5 Resets, I offer 5 small mindset shifts that are science-based, along with 15 science-backed strategies. And there are so many things that you can do in your day-to-day to really think about how to reset your stress. And I guess the first step you could do is create a MOST goal. So a MOST goal is simply, MOST is an acronym, MOST. Think about something that you want to achieve in 3 months. This is not like, this is your why, but it's not like this big existential, why am I here? What's going on? Simply, why do you want less stress? Why do you want less, decreased sense of burnout? Do you want more energy? Do you want to look for a new job? Do you want to pursue a passion and right now you're just stuck in this like very bad mental state and can't get out? Do you want better sleep? Do you want deeper, closer relationships? Do you want to be healthier in some capacity? Like, what's that reason that's going to get you to do a little bit of the work in terms of managing your stress and burnout, right? Like, do you just want to feel better? There are so many very simple things that you can think of. So, one, is it motivating? Oh, that's the M. O, is it objective? Is it something that you can measure? S, is it small? Something you can achieve. It takes about 8 weeks to build a habit. So give yourself 8 weeks to really, narrow it down and start building. Understand that part of habit formation is falling off and getting back on. So give yourself 3 months fully to achieve it, knowing that you're going to fall back, fall off the wagon, get back on. And then T, is it timely? Is it something that feels urgent and something that you can do. So when you create your most goal, the reason you want to do something like that and actually write it out, like this is why I want less stress because of this. People have lots of examples. We can talk about the examples that people have shared with me, patients and readers of the 5 resets. And the reason you want to create that most goal is because many of us, when we're feeling a sense of stress, you can't get out of your own way. Your amygdala, which is where your stress response is housed and your fight or flight response is powered by that amygdala, it is all about survival and self preservation, immediate needs. When you are thinking about managing stress, feeling better, these are future focused emotions, strategic thinking, planning, etc. That kind of way of thinking is governed by an area called your prefrontal cortex, which is right behind your forehead, right here. When your amygdala is on high alert and doing its thing and you're feeling that stress response, that prefrontal cortex is kind of muted. And that's why it's hard to think clearly when you're feeling a sense of stress or make plans or be organizing, planning, memory, cognition. All of that lives in your prefrontal cortex. And so it's about dialing down that amygdala so that your prefrontal cortex can take over again. And that's what that first creating a most goal helps you do. It helps you get out of your own way. Often when people are feeling stressed, like my patients, they know what they need to do to feel better, or they have that, but they can't get there. It's not a gap in knowledge and information. It's a gap in action. And it's hard to take that first step when you're feeling a sense of stress and you're mired in like immediate needs because your amygdala is firing. And so it's about slowly tweaking that over time. But the first step is creating a most goal. And then you work backwards. Then we talk about, how to actually get there. It feels less vast where you are and where you need to go when you create a goal that you say, okay, I'm going to achieve this in the next 12 weeks. I want to try to feel this way. So patients have said all sorts of stuff. People have said to me, I want to have more energy. I'm sick of being stressed. I feel so stressed and burned out. I have a plan for this summer. I want to take a bike ride with some friends and we're going to, they want to travel through Europe and I just don't feel like I can do it. I don't have the energy to do that, or I don't have the physical, I'm not feeling physically fit right now and I want to get there. Some people have said, I want to get a new job. I hate my boss. So it's such a bad job. It's a toxic workplace, but I don't have it in me to look for a new job because when you're feeling a sense of stress and burnout, you're overwhelmed. You're so just in survival mode. And it's about getting you out of that survival mode back to thriving. And it's an actual switch in your brain that can do that.
So before we go deeper into some of these stress management techniques, and I love how you just described that one, I want to talk about the difference between bad stress and good stress. Like I think it's like distress versus eustress, if I remember correctly, because I think it seems like they both impact us the same, as far as physiologically. Like talk about the difference between the two and how do we know if the stress is actually good or bad?
A very important distinction to make because when you and I and everyone else, you're like, oh, I had a tough week, it was so stressful, or today was a really stressful day. We throw that word around, stress or being stressed or feeling stressful, etc., all the time. But what does it actually mean? In fact, what we're talking about in scientific terms is bad, unhealthy stress. And it's in scientific terms, it's called maladaptive stress.
Dang, I got it wrong.
But there are, in fact, two kinds of stress, and not all stress is created equal. You have healthy, good, productive stress, and you have that is called adaptive stress. And then you have unhealthy stress, what we call maladaptive stress. And they both work differently on your body. So examples of healthy, productive stress, things like rooting for your favorite sports team, falling in love, having a new child, or getting a new job, a promotion, buying a new car, or buying a house, or taking a vacation. These are all things in your life that have happened to some people and not others, etc. But these are all sort of things that have a sense of stress because it's good, healthy stress, but it is still stress. And it affects your brain in similar ways that, you feel that sense of stress. But healthy stress moves your life forward. Contrast that to unhealthy stress. When we all know what that, we don't have to talk about the examples of unhealthy stress. We know what those are. And that's dysfunctional, unproductive. What we speak of when we talk about unhealthy stress is that it's maladaptive. And so this idea of adaptive stress versus maladaptive stress. And stress, because they're two different kinds of stress, when healthy, positive stress that drives your life forward starts getting out of hand and getting to high levels, it transforms to unhealthy stress. And it's about transforming that unhealthy, unproductive stress back to healthy levels so it can drive your life forward, help you rather than harm you. And so the goal of life is not to live a life without stress. It's in fact biologically impossible to do that. So anyone who promises a life without stress, don't believe them. It's like absolute hype. It's about living a life with healthy, manageable stress that can help drive your life forward in positive, productive ways.
Is there I know you've talked about burnout and how essentially the hustle culture and this toxic resiliency can really wreak havoc on people's lives and the way they handle stress. From like a habit standpoint, like is there things that you see people do on a daily basis that they may be overlooking that actually cause more stress in their life?
How much time do we have?
All day.
It is, in fact, just modern life and the way we live it. The default is that it is going to cause toxic stress. For example, first thing in the morning, you wake up. What is the first thing you do? If you're like most people, you scroll through your phone. Your phone is on your nightstand. Just, you think it's benign. You look at social media, quickly scan your emails. You might not be responding to your work emails, but you're looking at emails, you're looking at social media, you're maybe reading some news headlines. And then after a few minutes of doing that, maybe 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, and you get out of bed. That simple act, what you think is benign because everyone does it. I mean, your alarm clock is linked to your phone and everyone does it, right? It's on your nightstand. That simple thing is setting off a whole cascade in your brain to rev up your amygdala and your stress fight or flight response. So that is like the first thing that we do. Then you move through your day, you are at work, you keep this little device near you at work because I don't know, that's what we do. We keep it right there. There is a phenomenon called popcorn brain when you spend too much time online. It is not it's a clinical syndrome. It's not the same as internet addiction because internet addiction is exceedingly rare. Not many people have internet addiction. Internet addiction simply means that like your use of the internet is so powerful that it's impacting your life in terms of relationships, your job, your well-being and health. That is not what most people have. Most people have popcorn brain, which is you're constantly stimulated and often overstimulated that your brain starts to have that sensation of popping. So it's more and more difficult to live offline. And so we continually grab our phones, check, we're in the middle of doing work or trying to meet a deadline or answering, and then you're checking your phone. And it's almost a compulsion, right? It's not you, it's your biology of stress. And the reason we do that, we can talk about the primal urge to scroll. It's your biology. It's like evolutionarily, there was a night watchman when we were all cave people. And the night watchman would scan for danger, make sure everything was safe so the tribe could sleep. Now we're all our own night watchmen. And so we keep scanning all day long when you feel a sense of stress, like we talked about, right? Hypervigilance, a sense of you're scanning your environment for danger. It's a sense for an immediate need for safety. And when you don't feel that, or when that is in question when you're feeling a sense of stress because your brain, your amygdala, doesn't know the difference between like a famine and a real threat and a tiger in a forest or a work deadline or financial constraints or marital conflict. These metaphorical tigers now are things that are ongoing, not something back, when we were all cave people. You fought the tiger, the fight or flight response means that you fight the tiger in the forest or you flee. And then that acute threat is over. And then your body comes back to baseline. Now that tiger is all around us all the time. We have many tigers and that feeling of stress and the fight or flight response stays on in the background and your brain needs time to recalibrate. And so that is, modern life is set up for that. Then we have all sorts of things vying for our attention during the day because of this little thing. And then often we're sedentary, right? Sitting is the new smoking. And so most of us, very few people in the US, only 25% actually get the needed amount of exercise, which is approximately 30 minutes a day. Most people are sedentary. You sit all day at work, get in your car, and then you go home, and then you sit on your sofa watching Netflix. Again, this is just the default. It is just how it's baked into society. And so from the minute you wake up until the time you go to bed, you are just moving through your life, doing what you can. It's not like you're doing anything wrong. It's just how society is set up, right? The modern world. So we are continually, it's like the stress response is always on. I mean, I just gave you like a typical day, right? And so that's what I mean about like how much time do we have? What are we doing all day, every day to manage our stress? Well, it's like we're just trying to make it through the day. And especially when you're feeling a sense of stress and burnout, you're like, I just need to get through the day. So you do all of these things, not even realizing that it's not really helping your stress and likely making your stress worse. And so it's about adding a few small moments throughout the day to rewire your brain and body. And what happens with neuroplasticity and resetting your brain and body for less stress, more resilience, less burnout is that it doesn't take this like huge radical, when you're feeling a sense of stress, going to the gym. Like when I was in my own personal stress struggle, which is why I vowed to become a doctor with an expertise on stress because I was a stress patient. The thought of going to a gym, I had a gym in the bottom of my building in the basement. It was like the state of the art, gorgeous gym. I walked in, I walked right out. Like the thought of going to the gym for an hour a day, it's like it's abrasive when you're feeling a sense of stress and burnout. And so it's about creating moments throughout the day, small moments throughout the day, that can in fact rewire your brain and body for less stress. It's not huge lifestyle overhauls that actually work.
So what are these small things that you think people can do throughout the day? I know you talked about most and checking in with yourself and just making sure that you're not falling into the trap of like scrolling through your phone, that you're getting daily exercise. Like what are some of the things if somebody is just looking to, just kind of change the trajectory of how they manage their stress in this modern world where it's incredibly difficult? What are some of these things they could pencil into their day?
Yeah. So let's start with like, since we're going on the a day in the life, right? So it's like you can start in the morning, keep your phone off your nightstand, invest in a low cost alarm clock instead. It's just about creating a digital boundary. It's not about, you're not trying to become a digital monk. In fact, the studies show that abstaining from all devices is actually not really beneficial for your health and well being. Decreasing your reliance on these devices is very beneficial. And so creating a little buffer. So when you're waking up in the morning, instead of like going right to your phone, it's off your nightstand. So there is less of an impulse. And it's just a regular alarm clock that you have there. And so you're not checking your phone first thing in the morning. You're waking up, if you have a bed partner, you're engaging with your bed partner, or you are getting up, going to the bathroom, brushing your teeth, just getting a little bit more awake. And then you can check your phone. So that buffer can help a lot and has been a game changer for me and many of my patients. So, keeping it off your nightstand. Then during the day, keeping it out of arm's reach. So you are decreasing your primal urge to scroll. It's out of sight because the science shows that there's something called brain drain. So it's not just that your phone, the popcorn brain phenomenon, which is like when you're engaging with your devices, but in fact, just having your phone nearby, like I have it right here for demonstration purposes, right? It's like right next to me. That causes brain drain, which is that it's a phenomenon of like, it's the sheer potential for distraction by just having it near you. So that's another strategy. Then stop, breathe, and be is another great strategy that you can use. You can use that throughout the day. Typically, for most of us who do Zoom meetings, if you're working from home, it's great to do right before a Zoom. Any mundane, repetitive task that is about to cause a lot of stress, like getting your kids ready for school, packing the lunches, going to the bus stop. That moment, I mean, for if you're a parent or you're a working parent, you're trying to get your kids out the door for school and get to work at the same time, oh man, like every minute counts like that during that time. And so what can you do? You can practice stop, breathe, be, or before you hit join Zoom. And the way you do that is you stop. The instructions are in the name. It's a 3-second exercise and it can help rewire your brain over time and really strengthen that mind body connection. So you stop, you breathe, and then you be. And it's just something that you do over and over and over again throughout the day. Stop, breathe, be. You can mutter it under your breath. You can do it I do it when I'm brushing my teeth. I do it right before I hit click Zoom. I did it right before I joined you today. I do it all day, every day, and it helps to reset your stress. It's actually one of the first strategies that I learned when I was resetting my stress. There are so many things. A 5-minute walk, even a simple, it doesn't mean you have to go to the gym every day. In fact, like I said, when you're feeling a sense of stress and overwhelm, the last thing you want to do is do a heavy workout and, spend an hour at the gym. And so avoid, and when you're doing something new, a new habit, it's just so much easier to do something every day. Commit to a 5 or 10 minute walk, put it into your calendar rather than saying, I'm going to the gym 3 days a week for an hour, simply because when you are feeling a sense of stress, your brain making decisions, like we talked about, right? Decision making capacity is the prefrontal cortex. And when you're in that stress mode, you are governed by the amygdala. So instead, focus on one thing that you can do every day, like a short walk, 10 minutes, 20 minutes ideally if you can. But even if you can't do a 20-minute walk, aim for a 5-minute walk. It avoids decision fatigue. It's the same as a scroll, right? It's like the same as like an Instagram or TikTok or Facebook scroll. 20-minute walk, swap it out instead. That can have a profound effect on your mental health. So many other strategies. Another really great one is stop multitasking. Multitasking is a myth. There's no such thing. It's a misnomer. Monotask instead. And protect your bedtime. Aim for a 10 o'clock bedtime. I could go on and on. The list is endless, but there are so many strategies that you can do. The other really important thing with all of these resets is that everything is free. That was really important to me when I wrote the book because I have patients of varying economic means and resources. And so and also everything is low time cost, meaning financially, you're not going to spend a lot of money. You're going to spend $0 doing any of these strategies and resets. And the second is that you're not going to spend a lot of time. And yet, in spite of that, they are very effective at managing your stress because they actually work. They're science-based, so they work on your brain. There's just one final thing I would say is to honor your breaks. And the reason is because studies have shown that when you are learning and, when you're stressed, of course, like we think that breaks aren't important, but in fact, scientifically, taking a break, as little as 10 seconds can make a difference, but ideally like a 10-minute break between various activities that you're doing during the day for work primarily, can help cumulatively reset your stress for the day. And studies have shown that when you are taking these breaks, it is not, when you're learning and when you're throughout the day, we're taking in so much information. And we used to think that that's when the learning would happen, right? Like when you're in the meeting, when you're trying to finish a project. But in fact, the science is increasingly showing that it's not during those active times that that information becomes cemented. It's during the rest times. And so protecting your brains and really honoring your breaks is a really important step in improving your mental health and decreasing your sense of stress and burnout.
There's been a big movement over the last few years to purposefully put yourself in stressful situations, whether it be sauna, cold plunge, like do the quote unquote like doing hard things. What are your thoughts on all that?
I get asked that question a lot, hormesis, right? Like, what is it about your body? And so I would say that personally, my focus is always on emotional, mental, psychological stress and not so much about physiological stress. But I would say, using that lens of self compassion, when you are feeling that sense of deep, emotional, when you're like very overwhelmed and you're feeling a great sense of stress, I would say to ease back on a lot of these things that can cause physical stress, because what you want to do is you want to be gentle, which is why I always prescribe for my patients who've had a lot of stress in their lives, you know, daily walks of 20 minutes and protecting your sleep, because what you're trying to do is fill the tank. And when you feel a little better and you have more emotional reserves and that tank is a little bit more full, the stress response has decreased, your amygdala is a little bit more even keeled, then you can consider adding some of these other strategies, right? But like at the onset, to really go all in when you're already feeling a deep sense of stress and burnout and overwhelm, to do some of these strategies, I don't know. To me, it feels very counterintuitive, like counterproductive to do this when, you are trying to decrease your stress. Now, that's not to say that you can't like dip your toe in a little bit, but often what we do is we go all in. It's like everything but the kitchen sink. And as I mentioned, the brain, the human brain, you can only really make 2 new changes at a time if you want those changes to stick. We talked about healthy stress and unhealthy stress. And so all kinds of change to your brain, even positive change, is a source of stress. And that's why when you're starting when you're starting your, for example, like at the start of the year, you're like, oh, I'm going to make these 20 changes to my life. These are my New Year's resolutions for this year. By February, you've kind of given them up. And then you go through that self defeating talk of, oh, I must not be very resilient, or I can't keep going, or, we have all that negative self talk going. And instead, telling yourself that just focus on 2 things at a time. So you and I have talked about lots of strategies and resets that can help with your stress. And so aim to just bring 2 of those elements into your life at a time, because we know that based on the science, even any change, even positive change, that like the kinds of changes that you're talking about that cause physiological stress, right? Like changes to your mitochondria and your DNA, et cetera, with some of these things. The key is that you want to really focus and make sure that you are in a good place before you do those things.
Right. I know at the beginning you talked about that managing stress is kind of like a muscle, right? If you're born and you have like a weak bicep, the more you work it, the better, the stronger it will get. And the same kind of goes with stress. What I'm hearing you say is that with the hormesis movement and putting yourself in these forced, stressful situations, it's not the same as going through life and learning how to effectively mitigate the natural stressful occurrences in life, correct? If you're like me and are constantly on the go juggling work, social outings, and all the other chaos life throws your way, I have found an absolute game changer that gives me some time back. Jimmy's Famous Meals is a local meal prep company that provides fully cooked, chef prepared meals and can deliver them right to your doorstep. I am currently about to eat the Greek lemon chicken, which is one of my favorites. I get this every week, and I absolutely love Jimmy's Famous Meals. They are so good and delicious. Picture this: no more stressing over what to cook after a long day, and always having a wholesome, delicious meal waiting for you in your fridge. Their meals are prepped, cooked, and ready to heat and eat in minutes. So say goodbye to the hassle of grocery shopping and meal planning. With Jimmy's Famous Meals, convenience is served straight to your doorstep. So if you're looking to get your time back and make healthy eating easy, head to jimmysfamousmeals.com, and when you use the promo code Doug25 at checkout, you'll get 25% off your order. Cheers to healthy eating.
I mean, everything that you do that is a challenge to your body and your brain will teach you something, right? That's what neuroplasticity is all about. Like, of course, when you do something and you have a challenge and you can overcome it, like when you're like, oh, I'm going to do a cold plunge every day, or I'm going to do intermittent fasting, like everything can teach us something. But what I'm kind of suggesting is like to have a gentler approach to your mental and physical health, particularly if you're struggling. I get asked a lot of these questions about like the hormesis movement, and I frankly do some of these things. Like I'm very eager to try cold plunge. I tried intermittent fasting for a while. There's some wonderful, for example, we can talk about intermittent fasting if you want. Some people love it and swear by it. For me, it caused a lot of gastritis, to be honest. I did it for a week and my stomach hurt and I had to take a little bit of, famotidine to help because I had gastritis afterwards, because the mornings for me were a very stressful time. I'm a working mother. And so not eating until noon or whatever I had said to myself I was going to do caused stress, because in the morning it's like I need my breakfast. And so I figured out through experimentation that that's what I needed. Now, it's an important thing to note that I didn't do intermittent fasting when I was in the midst of my deep stress struggle. I was working 80 hours a week. I was a medical resident and sleeping in the hospital every third night. So you could even argue that that was a form of stress, right? Like that was a form of bodily stress that I was putting myself in because I was working 80 hours a week and really had erratic sleep and wasn't eating very much, et cetera. And then I was taught at a young age in my medical training that pressure makes diamonds. And so I was like, hey, I'm a diamond in the making. And then my diamond cracked. So after a 30-hour call, I was seeing my patients rounding in the cardiac ICU, and I started having palpitations, like it felt like a stampede of wild horses across my chest. And I didn't know what that was. So immediately, it like knocked the wind out of me. So I immediately just sat down. My nurse and I like looked at each other and she gave me some orange juice and it went away within seconds. We both laughed it off like, oh, it's probably just low blood sugar. Haven't slept in 30 hours, probably just low blood sugar. And I kept rounding on my patients and I went home and I had those palpitations, never again in the hospital, never at work, always at night. And it lasted for a couple of weeks. Then I went to go see a doctor. The doctor did the full $1 million workup on my heart and blood tests, et cetera, and said, oh, everything's great. It's just stress. Go and try to relax. So I did all of the things to try to relax. I went for massages, hung out with friends, had dinners, went shopping, took a trip. Nothing seemed to help. And then that's when I put my scientist hat on and really dug into the science of what helps stress and burnout in real time, what changes your brain and body, and how does that actually happen? And then I found my way out of stress. And then I vowed to become the doctor I needed during that difficult time. And so I share this story simply to say that had I, during that like heightened time of stress and burnout, when I wasn't, when I had an erratic life, working 80 hours a week and not sleeping and not really eating well, because I just was seeing patients, right? As many residents do. At that time in my life, if I had added these things that cause physiological stress, like bodily stress to me, I don't think I would have done very well because my tank was so empty and I was just truly running on fumes. And if only I had had the lessons in the 5 resets, I mean, these are hard won lessons, Doug. Like I have spent 25 years learning these when I went through my own stress struggle that lasted about 3 months and I found my way out. But over the course of, these 25 years, I've taught many patients. And I think I come at it from a clinical perspective where people are really at the end of their rope in terms of their stress and burnout. And they've come to see me to get these scientific strategies. But a lot of this, the wellness industry, what you're talking about, like the cold plunge and intermittent fasting and all of these like biohacking that kind of world is different from what I do simply because I am seeing people when they are feeling so emotionally and just physically, emotionally, psychologically, often spiritually spent. And that I think right now, particularly now, more than ever, Doug, that's the moment that we're in, that most people feel just like I felt at that time because we just don't have much to give. And so if you're feeling that, and then you're saying, oh, you know what, I'm going to do cold plunges, I'm going to do intermittent fasting, I'm going to do all of these things to boost myself up, you might end up doing more harm than good simply because your amygdala and all of these parts of your brain and your body are just so depleted. And so it's about building yourself back up to a level that you feel good enough to then try those things again, because of the principle that it is a form of stress, right? It's a form of stress on your body. And when you are already feeling that sense of unhealthy, dysfunctional stress, adding more stress is probably not a good idea.
Right. This could be totally anecdotal, but I was incarcerated on felony drug charges back in 2008, and at that time, I was heavily addicted to drugs. I was a complete mess in all the areas that you just described, and I was incredibly stressed. And I got into fitness, and I started to work out when I was in jail, and it really helped me personally revamp how I manage stress moving forward. Because before, I managed stress with drugs, with substances, with you name it. I tried to use it to manage it. And it just completely changed things where I was like, oh, I found this thing called fitness where I can do push-ups, at the time in jail, or I could walk or I could run when I felt stressful. So I'm curious, like, do you think that was just because I was so maybe numb to what was going on in my life? I wasn't like constantly stressed when I was in jail. I mean, I was definitely stressed, but not like in a physiological way necessarily. That's why I was able to add more stress to my life physically and it was able to help me, or do you think I just got lucky?
So that's a great question. When I am talking about, what you were asking me about, like cold plunges and all of that, I think about that a little bit different than physical fitness because when you are feeling a sense of, so what helped me, I think about my time when I was feeling a deep sense of stress and burnout. I got into fitness, but in my own way, I started walking. And so I started doing 5-minute walks because I hadn't really, I worked 30, I did 30-hour shifts, worked 80 hours a week. And I was walking all over the hospital and going from one patient room to the other. But in terms of just like being outdoors, taking some deep breaths, walking and moving my body to kind of recalibrate to less stress. I wasn't doing that, right? And so for me, physical fitness was a big part of my stress journey, but not in the way you're describing with like lifting heavy weights and etc. For you, it's hard to think about it's hard to kind of tease out what was that element that really got you into a better place. I would probably say that maybe your body and your brain, while you were feeling a deep sense of stress because of course, your things that have happened to you at that moment in life, you weren't feeling so great. You also were in a environment like jail where that was like your primary focus, right? And so while you had a tremendous amount of stress with what had happened to you and what had just happened, you really rose to the occasion. And so kudos to you for kind of understanding that you were going to transform a lot of these behaviors and focus on that sense of fitness and that challenge, like saying to yourself, okay, I got one shot here. I'm going to make the most of it. And I'm going to just focus on my fitness to feel stronger and better. And, it's a real testament to you. That's not to say that, I wouldn't say that you got lucky, nor would I say like, yeah, that's the way to do it. I would say like it's very much on a case by case basis, right? Like that worked really well for you. You also had a very specific set of circumstances. You were in an environment that was cloistered where you were able to focus solely on your own recovery, and it's different for different people. And if you were out in the world and not in jail, and you had to think about, like, I don't know, rent and getting a job and, managing the relationships in your life outside of jail, driving to and from your job and being on time, et cetera, like, how would that have gone? Would you be able to devote all of that time and energy to fitness? And, all that to say that I do believe that we all have a limited amount of bandwidth. And I don't think that, when you're managing your stress, a lot of your bandwidth is tied up in that. And so if I don't feel like, oh, like going to jail was a helpful thing for you, I would never say that, right? But like I do feel like there was some sort of silver lining there because it helped you. It was your light bulb moment that got you really clear on like, this is what matters to me. I want to feel better. I want to get stronger. I want to get healthier. And then you did. And like that's such a testament to you.
Well, thank you. And the reason I brought that up is because you were talking about like how when people are super stressed, like you don't necessarily want to do things that are super stressful physically to add more stress. And when I was in jail, doing push-ups to me was incredibly stressful because I was fat and out of shape. I could barely walk up the steps. And so I'm relating that, I guess, to people who in everyday life, I've been a trainer for over 13 years. So I also understand the perspective of it, that you hear like one of the main reasons people go to the gym and lift weights is for stress relief and to improve their mental health. Like, are they getting that wrong, or does it actually, if they're used to it enough, can lifting weights and going hard in the gym help with managing stress?
I think it depends on a case by case basis. It depends on where you are. I love fitness. Like I love lifting weights and I love to exercise. But if you had told me as a non-exerciser when I was feeling so bad, like I said, right? I had a beautiful state of the art gym in my building and I was working 80 hours a week. I like went down there. I was like, okay, exercise is good for me. I have a gym in my building with these beautiful, and I walked in, I saw those beautiful machines and all the mirrors everywhere and the techno music blasting. And I turned around and walked right out because that form of exercise was not good for me at that moment. What was good for me at that time was walking because it was therapeutic. I was outdoors. I was focusing, it was a mind body connection. I was linking breath to movement. Over time, now I love lifting weights. I like doing yoga and Pilates and strength training and still walking. I walk every day. I walked this morning prior to us speaking, several hours before that. So I just think it's about where you are in your life, what else is happening in your life, and that if you have been told, oh, you're feeling a lot of stress and you should just exercise and go to the gym and lift weights, and you go do that and you don't feel good. If you feel great, more power to you, keep going. But if you don't feel good, it's also very easy to feel a sense of defeat and say, oh, I should probably just not exercise anyway. It's not worth it. Or say like, oh, there's something wrong with me because I don't feel better when I go hard at the gym when I'm already feeling a sense of stress. Maybe you need to try a different kind of movement. It's about moving your body in a way that feels good to you, that helps you feel more calm and centered and relaxed, rather than feeling a sense of like, because you've done workouts, right? I certainly have, like where I'm like, it was supposed to be a good thing, but it didn't make me feel very good. And understanding your body and having that awareness enough to say like, oh, this really works for me or this doesn't work for me. And you see that with your own, as a trainer, you see that with the people that you've helped. It's like some things really work for some people it doesn't work, and it's about trial and error and figuring it out. But when you are feeling so low and depleted, yes, physical fitness, getting out of your head and into your body is so important. But what I've told my patients, many of who have been lifelong non-exercisers, it's not the cosmetic promise of fitness, like you're going to get a six pack or you're going to get, biceps or all of this. It's the mental promise. That's what fitness offers. It like really does help with your mental health. It's the physical health part is a byproduct. It's what happens to your mental health that really makes a difference. And my belief is that you don't have to, this is about starting off, right? Like when you first want to start off, you're talking about people who are exercisers and have been doing this for a long time. But when you've never exercised, and the idea when you're feeling a sense of stress, it's like making one more decision. It's like spending an hour at the gym. If it doesn't feel good, go for a walk instead. Spend 20 minutes of your day walking. It's about building a habit. And over time, it's about training your brain for daily exercise. And then with time, when you're feeling better, then you can add gym workouts. And that seems to have helped many of my patients. And it helped me at the time too.
Along the same lines of what we're talking about now, you hear a lot that stress can have some major impacts on your physical health if it's chronic. You hear that stress can make you fat. You hear certain things like that. I'd love to hear what the science actually says about the impacts of specifically chronic stress on the body.
I mean, it's endless. I think that there's like so much data to show that chronic stress can impact your body and your mind. So there can be physical implications of chronic stress and mental implications of chronic stress. Stress can show itself like, and the stress that we're talking about, just to be clear, is maladaptive stress, right? Like, right. So it's like that unhealthy kind of stress, the chronic stress that just doesn't seem to go away. Chronic stress can have huge implications because of course, it's taxing on the brain and the body. So yes, it can increase your cortisol. Well, cortisol is the stress hormone. So when you're feeling a sense of stress, the cortisol is high. And that's why protecting your sleep, some daily form of gentle movement, those two things, and creating some digital boundaries can help decrease that cortisol. And then, your metabolism, the way your body metabolizes fat and other things can make a big difference for that. It's all connected. And so, yes, of course, chronic stress can impact your physical health. There's no question about that. And I think that there's so much data to show that both prolonged chronic stress can influence your brain and your body in not so healthy ways. That is not to say, that chronic stress can cause certain illnesses. I think that's a difference that we need to tease out. In one study, 60 to 80% of all doctor's visits, this is a very well-known statistic, 60 to 80% of all doctor's visits have a stress-related component. And yet only 3% of doctors counsel for stress management counseling. So there's a vast opportunity there. And when I state that study, 60 to 80% of all doctor's visits have a stress-related component, that's not to say that stress is the culprit. It's that it's not the cause, but it's a contributing factor. And that's a real important distinction to make. So yes, of course, chronic stress contributes to various health conditions and just your overall sense of well-being. And it has implications, has physical manifestations and mental manifestations, but it's not like this leads to this. It's not a causative phenomenon. It's more about it contributes to it. And so all the more reason, so regardless of your physical or mental health right now, based on that notion of neuroplasticity, when you do better, you feel better. And so you can start to manage your stress through these various strategies and resets we've talked about. And the hope is, I share lots of patient stories because I've had lots of patients who've come see me who have various things that have happened in their lives, right? And their physical health improves as a result of managing their stress. Because again, when you manage your stress, what are you doing? You're protecting your sleep. We know that when you don't sleep well, it can have an impact on your physical health. You are doing some form of daily movement every day, even if it's a 20-minute walk. Again, it can have huge impact on your physical and mental health, right? So it's all connected. It's not just one thing, it's many things. And your body is expertly designed to handle short bursts of stress. And the challenge is when it becomes chronic and ongoing, that's when burnout can set in. And that's what we're trying to do is like we're trying to reset our stress to get back into healthy levels. And then in turn, your physical health, of course of course it has an influence on your physical health and mental health. And we can talk about, we can list the many ways that stress can influence your brain and your body. I mean, it's really endless. Stress has a million flavors. Again, not causative. It is a contributing factor.
What about everyday substances that a lot of people use, like caffeine and alcohol? How do they impact stress?
In many ways. So again, it's all about how much, the dose and the frequency. And so, moderation is key for both. That's the short answer.
Because if you're stressed, I mean, I've also heard like if you're super stressed and your cortisol is high, like drinking caffeine on top of that is not good.
Yeah, there's so much data, and it almost feels like every week there's new data on caffeine. Like I remember a few months ago, it's like, oh, this is how much caffeine you should be drinking a day. And then I remember, just like a month later, don't you hear it all the time, right? Headlines like, coffee is now good for you. And then, oh, in fact, nope. This study shows that coffee is not good for you. I feel like we see that so much. There are certain recommendations for how much caffeine intake you should have, particularly if you have certain medical conditions that are triggered by caffeine, like the National Headache Society has a certain criteria for how much caffeine intake you have if you have migraines per se, or other kinds of medical conditions. And, it varies on your medical condition. It also is a personal thing. Like some people can tolerate certain amounts of caffeine and others can't. It's about understanding your body, understanding how caffeine influences you. But the general thing for stress is that no caffeine after 3 p.m., 4 p.m., because it does influence your sleep. And then when you feel a sense of stress, you are likely, sleep disturbance is often one of the first tells. And so understanding that your sleep, if you're having fragmented sleep, like disrupted sleep, difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, how do you get that back on track when you're feeling a sense of stress? It's, limiting your caffeine intake after 3 p.m. is really important. That's not to say you should have, 10 cups of coffee before 3 p.m. And it's like, but I did it. I did less caffeine after 3 and it didn't work. There are certain, of course, limitations for caffeine. Alcohol also, drinking alcohol at night can influence your sleep and your stress. But again, Doug, it's like you want to live in 2024 and you want to enjoy life. And so, it's all about moderation, right? So having a glass of wine here and there, it is okay. And some people, some studies show that it is beneficial, but it's about just dosing and frequency. That is the key, and understanding yourself. And also looking at some of the data, depending on certain medical conditions you may have or medications that you're taking, and how caffeine and alcohol can influence those. But it's all connected.
Right. I know there's 5 resets in your book. We covered the one, most in depth about like getting clear on what matters most. If you had to pick another one for somebody to focus on, to talk about, like with the remaining time that we have, like which one do you think is the most important for people to hear?
A really important one would be to sync your brain and your body, the mind-body connection. It sounds very woo-woo, but there is robust data to show that your brain and your body are in constant communication and inextricably linked. That is what the mind body connection is. And even though you may be hearing about the mind body connection for the first time now, you have experienced it your whole life. Butterflies at falling in love, the palpitations or feeling flushed on your face when you're having an embarrassing moment, or your stomach not feeling great before a presentation. We have lots of ways that we tap into the mind body connection all the time. It's like gravity happening all around you, and it's happening to you even now when we're speaking. The difference and the reason it's important to tap into your mind body connection, understand what it is because you can influence your mind body connection for less stress. And so stop, breathe, be, the technique we talked about, is a fantastic way. It's the gateway to understanding your mind body connection. And why it works is because when you are feeling a sense of stress and anxiety, anxiety is a future focused emotion. You're thinking like, what if this happens? And what if that happens? And what if? It's the runaway train. And stop, breathe, be gets you out of what if thinking and gets you back to what is in the here and now, in the present moment. When you do stop, breathe, be over and over again, 30, 40 times, I used to do that. What I would do, stop, breathe, be, it would be as I'm knocking on the exam room door, right before I turn the doorknob and enter to see a patient. That's when I would do stop, breathe, be. And I did that over and over 30, 40 times throughout the day. It then resets your stress. It taps into the mind body connection, gets you really grounded in the present moment. And over time, that has an impact on rewiring your brain and body.
Well, Dr. Aditi, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I love talking about stress. I love talking about how we can become better in our lives. And I think the audience is going to get a lot of value out of our chat. If people want to get a copy of your book, if they want to follow you on social media, if they want to connect with you and learn more about what you're doing, where's the best place to do that?
You can check out 5resets.com, number 5resets.com. I'm also all over social at Dr.Aditi Nerurkar. That's at DrAditi Nerurkar. Thank you, Doug, for having me on.
You got it. And like I said, I think the audience is going to really enjoy this one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.